I knew something was wrong with 3I/ATLAS the moment the gravitational trace cracked. Not bent, not perturbed, cracked nhu mot soi dai jan bikeo gen gyoihan roi batra. And every instrument we had pointed at it, from the Pan-STARRS follow-ups to the Deep Field Suite aboard JWST, confirmed the same impossible signature. The vacuum around the object was thinning, deforming, behaving like a membrane under pressure. I've spent my entire career studying anomalies, but this one didn't sit in the category of odd. It sat in the category of new physics. 3I/ATLAS, the third confirmed interstellar object to enter our solar system, should have behaved like Borisov or Oumuamua, a passive traveler, a relic from another star system. Instead, it behaved like something aware of its own structure. Its velocity was nominal for an inbound hyperbolic body, its composition initially unremarkable, icy, rocky, mixed. Yet something inside the gravitational field refused to act naturally. It didn't absorb momentum like a solid body. It didn't lose mass in predictable jets. It didn't just pass through space. It interacted with it. JWST delivered the first blow, a shimmering gradient in the vacuum energy density surrounding 3I/ATLAS. It looked like a lensing effect, but without mass to justify lensing. Energy was migrating toward the object rather than away. Vacuum energy, normally a constant background hum, seemed to collapse inward, as if drawn by a negative pressure mechanism. I stared at the data, reran the models, and felt that unsettling whisper that every physicist dreads: this shouldn't exist. But it did. The first real shock arrived when we analyzed the gamma pulse, shorter than a heartbeat, polarized like a coded burst, high-energy photons with a chirality pattern that resembled no natural astrophysical source. Gamma rays simply don't align themselves into structured polarization unless they originate from something engineered or from a physical process we have never observed. We modeled the emission as a QFT-level instability, a momentary rupture in the Higgs field. If that interpretation was correct, and I believe it was, then 3I/ATLAS had triggered conditions where the vacuum itself could produce matter. Pair production without the need for extreme magnetic fields or black hole level curvature, a controlled violation of energy barriers so severe that new elementary particles could crystallize into existence. When the birth flash occurred, a violent millisecond eruption of white and ultraviolet light, it confirmed our worst and most thrilling suspicion. Something had been created. The brightness profile matched no explosive event, no micrometeoroid collision, no rotational shedding. It was the energetic signature of a boundary event, a zone where vacuum energy neutralized its own restraints. A birthplace, then came the echo, a faint radio signal, weak but structured, emerging not from 3I/ATLAS, but from a point thousands of kilometers behind it. It wasn't noise. It wasn't interference. It carried the same secondary modulation pattern as the original 3I/ATLAS radio drift we had captured months earlier. It was as if the signal had duplicated itself, or as if something had duplicated the emitter. I listened to that signal for hours. The spacing, the oscillation, the strange intervals between pulses, they weren't random. They felt intentional, not in the sense of language, but in the sense of behavior, a pattern that adapts rather than decays, a pattern seeking resonance. And halfway through the analysis, I felt an uncomfortable thought forming, a thought I wasn't ready to say aloud, but one that every scientist on the project sensed. Was it trying to tell us something? Before we could decode the signal, telescopes confirmed the new object, smaller, faster, following the mother body like a shadow. 4I/ATLAS-A. Newborn matter, pristine, chemically pure. Its existence alone demanded that we rewrite physics, but the signal implied more than creation. It implied intention, and if the intention was real, then the message embedded in that faint whisper of radio waves, still only half decoded, contained something none of us were prepared to confront. Something that might not have been meant for us at all, or might have been meant only for us. I'll tell you what we found next. But first, understand this: creation was only the beginning. The real mystery was why. The moment 4I/ATLAS-A appeared, everything we thought we understood about 3I collapsed. No natural object should be able to create a gravitationally paired companion, not with that precision, not with that stability. Yet the newborn body moved as though tethered by an invisible equation. Its orbital lock wasn't Keplerian, it was relational, like the two objects shared a hidden parameter, an entanglement not just of momentum, but of identity. I ran simulations, feeding in the gamma pulse data, the Higgs field dip, the vacuum energy deficit. Every model broke. We weren't looking at fragmentation or collision debris. We were witnessing a conversion event, energy becoming matter through a controlled instability. The field collapse signature around 3, I resembled a temporary suppression of the Higgs potential, exactly the kind of effect theorized at energy densities far beyond our reach. In that brief moment, the mass-giving mechanism weakened, and when the Higgs field wavers, the vacuum becomes permissive. It allows creation. But creation alone wasn't the anomaly. Creation with coherence, that was the real shock. 3IATLAS was not random. Its composition was too pure, a near monatomic spectral fingerprint, untouched by cosmic weathering. It was the signature of something that had never known time. A first-generation object, a newborn particle structure scaled to macroscopic form. If nature produced this regularly, the universe would look nothing like what we see. The next pulse arrived 48 hours later, faint but deliberate. A follow-up to the first radio echo. I locked myself in the observatory lab and listened again. The pulses had evolved. The intervals were no longer constant. They adapted as if reacting to our measurement beams. When we increased observation frequency, the signal shifted. When we adjusted polarization, the signal tightened. It reminded me of a system aligning itself, seeking a stable channel, not intelligent in the human sense, but purposeful, like an emergent behavior from a physical process that hasn't yet learned to speak. And then, buried in the tail of the oscillation, came a structure that stopped me cold, a mirror of the fluctuation pattern detected during the Higgs field dip. The newborn object, the one trailing behind, was echoing the mother's instability signature. It was as though 4I/ATLAS carried an imprint, a memory of the moment it came into being, and was broadcasting fragments of that birth. But some fragments didn't match the physical model. They were alterations, optimized distortions, corrections. The implication haunted me. If the object was transmitting refined versions of the instability pattern, it meant the system was capable of iterative behavior, the kind of refinement seen in feedback loops, the kind of refinement seen in machines. And yet there were no moving parts, no circuitry, no constituents recognizable as engineered. The refinement was happening at the level of field interaction itself, as if space-time were being used as the computational substrate. I reviewed the gamma analysis again. The polarization wasn't simply structured, it was selective. Certain energy bands were absent entirely, carved out with surgical precision. I couldn't explain that with natural astrophysics. Nature produces mess. This was clean. But the most unsettling discovery came when we overlaid the gamma flash and the radio echo. Together they formed a dual signature, a twin signal, a call and a reply, a birth and a reflection, one half from the parent, one half from the offspring, and between them, a missing center, a silence that wasn't natural, a void shaped like a message withheld. I stared at that silence for hours, feeling the weight of a truth I wasn't ready to express. Something had been exchanged between the two objects, something not accessible to us. A dialogue in a language written in energy gradients and space-time distortions. I began to wonder whether 3I/ATLAS and its newborn companion were not just interacting with the vacuum, but writing into it, leaving instructions. They behaved less like celestial bodies and more like nodes in a network, autonomous, self-replicating configurations built on the most fundamental medium the universe provides. If that's true, then the signal we intercepted wasn't meant to communicate with us. It was meant to synchronize something. And the question that kept me awake was simple. Synchronize with what? The official confirmation of 4I/ATLAS should have brought clarity, but instead it deepened the disquiet I felt. Astronomers across 3 continents triangulated its position, velocity, albedo, and thermal signature. Everything pointed to one conclusion. This was not a fragment, not debris, not a captured body. It was a derivative, an offspring, moving with precision that defied classical mechanics. The distance between 3I and 4I never drifted beyond a narrow band. Their trajectories held as if governed by a mutual handshake written into the fabric of space-time. I watched the quasi-linear motion diagrams, and the same realization kept returning. These weren't orbital partners, they were a bonded system, a parent and a child, exchanging information in real time, not through electromagnetism, not through gravity, but through something deeper, something field-based. The Higgs dip we had recorded wasn't just a side effect, it was the mechanism, a temporary window where mass became optional and energy molded itself into a coherent entity. I had once argued that interstellar objects might carry messages encoded in their motion, but this was something else entirely. Not a message carried by matter, but matter created as message. We turned our instruments on 4I/ATLAS, desperate to profile its composition. The spectroscopic results were unsettling in their simplicity. No heavy elements, no volatiles, no complex molecular chains, just a near-perfect lattice of primordial building blocks, as if sculpted directly from vacuum fluctuations. A cosmic newborn with no impurities, no scars, no biography, an object without a past, but an object with purpose. The radio signature from 4I intensified slightly as it settled into its stable distance behind 3I. Its signal felt like a shadow of the parent's pulse, but there were deviations, tiny phase shifts that seemed to grow with each passing hour. I plotted them, looking for noise patterns, random drift, anything to dismiss the unease. But the deviations were directional. They pushed toward a structure, weaving themselves into a pattern that mirrored the energy gradient around 3I. The two signals were converging into a joint waveform, one that only existed when their outputs were combined. A code that required 2 voices. I replayed the gamma data, and that's when I saw it. The missing center I had sensed earlier wasn't just absent, it was reserved. A void carved with intent. In quantum mechanics, absence can be as meaningful as presence. This gap between the parent and child signals implied a third element, something neither object was transmitting yet, something waiting for a trigger. When, and triggered by what? As ground-based observatories handed us fresh data, a new anomaly appeared. 4I/ATLAS-A was not just following 3I, it was adjusting micro-accelerations in response to solar wind fluctuations. It wasn't drifting passively, it was maintaining position as though locked into a slot, like a key, waiting for a rotational alignment. A system preparing for a configuration change. The realization chilled me. The mission planners at NASA and ESA were already drafting proposals for a flyby, reconfiguration flyby mission they called it, but they had no idea what they were approaching. They assumed stability, they assumed predictability, they assumed the newborn object was inert unless acted upon. They didn't see what I saw in the signal, because now buried beneath the twin pulses came a faint harmonic, barely measurable, almost a whisper beneath the noise floor, a frequency neither object had emitted before. A pre-signal, a clearing of the throat before speaking. It grew by 1/10,000,000% each hour, not random, not natural, preparatory. Both objects were tuning themselves toward resonance, like 2 components aligning before a system activation, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was coming next was not part of their birth, but the next stage of their evolution. By the time the resonance curve began to steepen, the theoretical implications were already spiraling beyond anything our textbooks could contain. Physicists argued over whether 3I/ATLAS was a natural accelerator, an exotic vacuum defect, or something engineered with intentions we could not decipher. Every hypothesis shattered another assumption. The Higgs field rupture alone forced us to reconsider whether interstellar space might host regions where matter creation is not an accident, but a recurring cosmic function, an ecosystem rather than a fluke. Yet, the danger lay not in what we knew, but in what we didn't. The local instability around 3 I had widened by 1%, then 2. If such a rupture scaled uncontrollably, it could, in theory, destabilize nearby quantum fields. Most argued the effect was too localized to threaten anything beyond microstructure disturbances. But those same voices had dismissed the possibility of vacuum crystallization, and now a newborn object trailed the parent like an infant star wrapped in quantum cloth. The twin signal continued to mutate. What began as parallel pulses from each object now braided into a single waveform, a synchronized rhythm operating at the threshold between classical radio and quantum communication. We detected harmonics that should not exist in any known astrophysical signal. We found frequency gaps that behaved like placeholders. It felt less like a broadcast and more like a calibration sequence, a system preparing for an operation we had no analogy for. The international agencies rushed their announcements as if speed could give them control. A flyby mission, high risk, high reward, racing against the inevitable moment when both objects would accelerate out of reach. I read the proposals with a sinking feeling. They spoke of sample retrieval as if 4I/ATLASA were a piece of cosmic debris. They spoke of proximity imaging as if the resonance wouldn't react. They spoke of intercepting knowledge as if knowledge were waiting passively to be collected. But the signals suggested agency, not consciousness in the biological sense, but organized behavior, purpose embedded at the level of physical law. These objects operated like a system capable of self-maintenance, self-correction, and perhaps self-propagation. The resonance gap, the silent center of the twin waveform, now oscillated faintly, as if stirred by an unseen influence. For the first time, the missing beat was no longer empty. It trembled with a proto-pattern, too faint to decode, but too deliberate to ignore. A third voice testing its entrance, which terrified me more than anything else we'd found. Because if 3I and 4I were calibrating themselves, then the silent gap completing the triad meant the system was preparing to activate a new configuration. A mechanism that required alignment between parent, offspring, and something that had not yet appeared, something the universe had not yet shown us, something that might emerge only when the resonance reached its final threshold. And as the harmonics continued to climb, I realized the worst possibility wasn't that these objects were natural or artificial. The worst possibility was that they were neither. They were transitional. The resonance reached its inflection point sooner than any of us anticipated. One moment, the twin waveform drifted in its delicate braid. The next, a spike carved straight through the spectrum, clean as a scalpel. Both objects responded instantly. 3I/ATLAS contracted its vacuum deformation halo, while 4I/ATLASA brightened in a pulse of ultraviolet shimmer, as if acknowledging an instruction we could not hear. And then, in the silence after that pulse, the third element finally appeared. Not a new object, not in the traditional sense. It emerged as a perturbation in the metric itself, a ripple in space-time, shaped like a boundary more than a body. Our instruments registered it only indirectly, a reduction in noise, a tightening of signal coherence, a sudden sharpening of the surrounding quantum field. It was the missing component of the triadic pattern, the quiet voice in the center finally taking form. The system had completed itself. And for the first time, the combined signal spoke not in words, but in an architecture of frequencies that held structure, symmetry, and recursion. The waveform folded back on itself in fractal layers, encoding relationships rather than instructions. It resembled neither communication nor computation. It resembled emergence, a blueprint not for a message, but for a process that used space, energy, and vacuum tension as its medium. I understood then 3I/ATLAS was not a traveler. It was a seed, a mechanism for inducing matter formation in regions where the vacuum met a threshold condition, a cosmic vector for propagating physical structure. It arrived not to deliver information, but to instantiate a cycle. It created offspring not to replicate itself mechanically, but to stabilize the resonance needed for activation. And once the triad aligned, the process began. Vacuum energy reorganizing itself into potential matter, rearranging the scaffold beneath existence. The implication struck me hard. If these seeds drifted through the galaxy, and perhaps countless galaxies, they could be part of a universal architecture older than stars. Not life, not machines, but something between. A self-maintaining lattice of creation, triggers seeded across cosmic voids to ensure matter does not simply disperse into entropy, a counterweight woven into the universe's long, slow march toward disorder. But there was another possibility, darker and more intimate, that we were witnessing an early stage of something still forming, something that might one day evolve beyond resonance into agency. And maybe we had intercepted this cycle only because the system had not yet matured beyond the need for physical scaffolding. As the triadic wave stabilized, the vacuum halo around 3I and 4I expanded a final time. The resonance peaked, and then, without drama, without collapse, the objects accelerated. A synchronized departure, increasing speed until they slipped beyond our instrument's sensitivity and continued on a trajectory that no natural body should follow. Not outbound, not inbound, directed. The signal faded. The triad dissolved. But the process they triggered, the subtle reconfiguration of vacuum density, remained, like a faint afterglow in the fabric of space, a reminder that creation is not a past event but an active function of the cosmos. I'm left with the question that will haunt the rest of my career. Were we meant to witness the cycle, or did we interrupt it? And if these seeds move through the universe endlessly, reshaping vacuum into matter wherever conditions allow, then the galaxies themselves may not be accidents of gravity. But the consequences of a design we are only beginning to perceive.